Can you all hear me very well? Is the mic setting fine? Perfect. So I'm blessed with a slot which is exactly after lunch, but not before you have your afternoon coffee. So probably you're now the most tired you'll be this entire day. I'll have to deal with that. And the best way would be probably to scare you with some sort of a risk or attack vector that you didn't think about before. Hopefully I'll do a good enough job, or at least keep this interesting. Before I start, who guesses, who is willing to guess, what's the favorite holiday for hackers? Christmas, why? Yeah, exactly. So Christmas, because no one is working. Last year on Christmas, there has been a huge campaign where attackers managed to do something very elegant, taking over about 40 admin accounts on the Chrome Web Store, replacing legitimate browser extensions into malware. The most virtuous one was the browser extension of Cyberhaven, which is a premium DLP company, hence all their deployments are of enterprises, which is where attackers want to be. And that really raised to the awareness the risks associated with browser extensions. In the last year, there has been a lot of research about that. We won't cover everything about malicious browser extensions today. We'll talk about the identity risks associated with them. Naturally, there are so many other things. I managed not to say AI so far, but we also have now AI workloads in browsers and AI browsers, which will probably be a great topic for next year. A little bit about myself. My name is Eshed. Or is indeed my full initial name. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Flarex Security. We're a browser security company. In the last decade and a half, I'm doing mostly machine learning, attack, and defense, so all cybersecurity, mostly web security. During my career, I was doing a lot of research on browser security and led to the takedown of one of the largest browser hijacker chains in history that ended up with a few folks ending up in jail. So I'm really passionate about what we do. In today's agenda, we'll talk about a couple of things. We'll first of all understand what is a browser extension, why should we care about that? Because basically for you guys, risk is kind of like water to fish. It's not enough to be there. It needs to have some sort of a context. It needs to be relevant and interesting. Then how can that be relevant to compromise identities and passwords? And lastly, talking a little bit of what you can do on the, on the budget kind of approach. The objectives for the session are to, first of all, as I said, discuss the risks of malicious extensions, understand what kind of permissions they need, so how do they work? What's the difference between extension A to extension B? What should you be looking for when you analyze them? And lastly, what kind of TTPs they have, and what can you do about them? But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about browsers and identities. And it all starts with authentication. I guess some of you here in the room were born after 1992. Or 1993. So some are. So on that year, the first commercial browser came to the market with a mechanism that's called cookies, and cookies are a way for browsers to keep data on the device. Since then, that mechanism didn't change whatsoever. Still today, websites use cookies to store data. One of that data is the authentication on the device. So although user activity has changed, the way the users authenticate to applications didn't change. So at the beginning, when users came up to the office and everything was physical or based on a line, all the servers and users were in the same physical location. Everything was IP-based with a very fixed separation between workloads. Then we moved to a second wave, which is client-server authentication. About a decade and a half ago, a traditional CASP approach, self-hosted applications, remote connectivity, VPN, allowing access based on logical identities, passwords, and distinction between work and personal applications. It was very clear that I have my, I don't know what was before Facebook, I'm pretty young myself, but you have your personal stuff and then you have your work stuff, and they can really be separated from one another. But today everything has a mutual usage. So think about ChatGPT. I have my work instance, my personal instance. I can be granted a third-party instance, let alone I have like 15 different email addresses to register to all kinds of things, and to have a spam inbox, and have a couple of work emails, and I'm still using a SaaS application from an old workplace because they didn't lock me out. So I have a lot of different kind of instances. Every application is multi-tenant on the same host name. So the approach that has been to restrict access based on addresses is becoming very challenging. It's not very applicable because users can do many things on the same application. Or the way I will explain this to my grandmother, Grandma, your Facebook and my Facebook are not the same Facebook. We get to the same site, but we get a very different response. But still, we have cookies in the process, as I said before. So it's very, very simple. We have the user, and we have the browser, and we have the application. And then the user is communicating with the browser in a way which is encrypted and secure on the device. The browser is communicating with the SaaS application in a way which is secure and encrypted by TLS 1.3 or quick or soon post-quantum ciphers, but we have some sort of a gap. The cookie is being stored on the browser and is being utilized inside the session. And the question is, what's happening when you're inside a session? Like, how is that being used? And eventually what happens is that the application will store a credential in the cookie. Now, there are other things to that as well. It's not only the cookies on the device. When I'm signing into an application, I have the ability to store my passwords on my Chrome browser or any other browser now with new AI browsers. I can also use a password manager. I can use a specific profile. I can use devices, different kinds of devices, and sync them in different ways. So there are actually many ways in which passwords and credentials can propagate between environments, and all of which have a lot of significance. So think about that in zero trust context. Always verify, always check. That bullshit doesn't really exist in the browser. It doesn't really happen. I have something static in my browser. It's just there. And if someone has my screen resolution, my browser agent ID, and my cookie or password, that's pretty much enough. So think about it from an attacker standpoint, and going back to the Christmas analogy. When we build defenses, we assume all kinds of assumptions. We build it in layers. So we have an impossible travel, and on that we have a password and an MFA and a few other things. But what the attacker will do is waiting for Christmas. Users are traveling. Impossible travel is not very impossible anymore. We don't have the best staff in the job. They ask for MFA reset, and suddenly the onion is being unpeeled, and we get eventually to what's happening inside that session in real time. So for this introduction, the bottom line is a lot of identity activity is happening in the browser in a way that didn't change in the last 30 years, and some of your employees are younger than these mechanisms. They didn't change whatsoever. Moving on to the first part of the presentation. What are browser extensions, and why should you care about them? So what is an extension? An extension is running in the browser, so technically it's agentless. In the same way that if it's, I don't know, if it's swimming, it's a fish. Not really true, but it's agentless. It's running in the browser. It doesn't have its own user agent on the device. It's running in behalf of the browser user agent. So think about it this way. Let's say that I have some sort of a malicious extension that's stealing cookies. As an example, on the OS, what CrowdStrike or Defender will see is Chrome reached out to the cookies and fetching one, which is very, very benign. It has both an agent and a network functionalities, so it can behave kind of like, a polymorphic animal that I will touch that in the next couple of slides. It has visibility into unencrypted traffic and data. And going back to the example before, the traffic from the device to the browser is encrypted, and that's based on the sandboxing of the browser. The traffic from the browser to the application is also encrypted, and in a way, a lot of network security is based on that encryption. But inside this realm, chaos, a huge party, everything is unencrypted, all the services can see each other and operate inside the same ecosystem. And it can use or abuse browser access and visibility. I will explain what that means. The browser extension mechanism has all kinds of APIs they can use inside the browser. Why do these actually exist? The browser vendors are using them. They develop extensions themselves. You just don't see them, but they're actually hidden and embedded inside the browser. Why do they do that? The same way Microsoft is developing DLLs and agents, and not everything is written to Windows, because that will cause a blue screen of death. The browser vendors also develop their own extensions because they don't always want to make changes to the browser itself. So they created a mechanism that allows to make changes. They give extensions these powers that they cannot really take away at this point in time. Over time, only the ID and who has the extension are persistent. Anything else can change and mutate endlessly. So let's say that I win the lottery, and with that money I decide to make more money by buying an extension that already has deployments and turn that into something that steals data or money or whatever. I can go on the dark web and search for extension owners with unlimited number of installations, let's say 50,000, and negotiate with them on buying the extension. Once I do that, I can change the extension. I can change the name, the code, the permission, the manifest, which is kind of like the basic ID of the extension. The extension will stay on the device on which it's installed. Users will not know that it changed. There will be no notification. The ID will remain the same. So it means that organizations that have an inventory of IDs can't really do anything about that. It will actually be something entirely different. I come from malware analysis background. It doesn't behave like real malware in which we check for the hash. There is no equivalent of a hash within extensions. And are using permissions that are here to stay. If you're interested, every year we'll release a Larix extension security report. You can also Google that, and we provide all kinds of stats about different permissions that may be interesting. I'll leave it here for 3 or 4 seconds, but you can also find that on Google afterwards. On high level, about 99% of our enterprises have at least one browser extension on their device. So it's becoming very, very, very uncommon not to allow extensions today in enterprises. And over half of organizations' users have more than 10 extensions. So let's think about it from IT management standpoint. Why not just blocking? What really happens in real life is that users need extension for all kinds of tasks. It starts, first of all, with developers. Developers are a huge community of the users for extensions. A lot of it is related to web application testing. So they install all kinds of extensions for web application testing. Some of them, by the way, are not coming from the official Chrome Web Store. They find them on GitHub, which is equivalent to, when I tell my kid, don't eat that, that's from the floor. Finding an extension on GitHub and just pushing that to your browser or obfuscated, it's really the similar equivalent of that. It can do all kinds of things on web applications and introduce risks. The thing is, it's really hard to block those developers from doing that. Then we see other populations as well. Now AI, second time in the presentation, also made a lot of populations in the enterprise needing to have an extension or installing something. And lastly, and I think this is the really impactful trend, a lot of SaaS applications now say, use our browser extension together with our services. You'll enjoy a better everything. So Salesforce has an extension, marketing applications got extensions, Calendly has an extension, just helps you get your job done and use more and more of those. The last time I checked on our database, there are about 480 extensions now in the Chrome store that says that they are Salesforce something. Naturally, not all of them are developed by Salesforce, but there are a lot of those. What kind of data do they have? About half of enterprise users have extensions with a high or critical level permissions. How do we define the criticality of a permission? Basically, by how valuable is the data that it can fetch. So their ability to fetch data is actually very, very simple. There is not a lot of sophistication. If they have permissions to cookies, one line of code, I got all your cookies. Think about it like Matrix. I know Kung Fu. I have all your cookies. I can see all your scripts. I can see all the data in motion, but they need to have those permissions. When they apply to the Chrome store, they submit their extension with all kinds of permissions, and then there is someone somewhere in Google, I don't know who they are, but they make some sort of an assumption whether that's reasonable or not reasonable for an extension to have that. Sometimes a lot of organizations will check, does it really necessary to have an extension that is supposed to provide AI summary for applications that can access everything on the device? Still, it's really hard to understand, by the way, from the permissions, is it that malicious? And sometimes you can have permission escalation during the session, but that's not on today's topic. Then there is another piece of it. Okay, so we need these extensions. Someone asked for them. The developer needs them. But over half of extensions are identified by a free Gmail account. So think about it from supply chain standpoint. It's just something that some dude or some lady developed on their weekend, and now they uploaded that. It can be vulnerable. It doesn't have to be malicious. It can just be trouble. About 1 out of 10 extensions on the Chrome store have lower than 1,000 installs, so the long tail is pretty long. And 79% of extension publishers only released one extension so far. And we also see, by the way, bad actors, they use a new identity every time they publish a new extension. So that's happening. What you don't see here is the other side of it. Not all extensions on the Chrome Web Store, so you don't actually know who developed them. Now, the only technical slide is this one. The anatomy of a browser extension. I'll do it quite quickly. I don't want to exhaust you, but an extension has two pieces. One of them is called a service worker or background worker that is running in the background, and actually technically it's like a website that's always on. When I turn on the browser, there is another website owned by a developer that can be an attacker that I can't see, but it's there and it can do all kinds of things. The things it can do is utilizing all kinds of APIs in my browser that are supposed to be really, really secure, such as the cookie API. But then it can do something else, which is injecting code to other websites, and that's called the content script. I'll avoid going into the details, but the content script can be injected to the final form of a website called the document object model, or in short, the DOM. The DOM is what you get on your screen once the website is fully rendered. So eventually, the service worker is kind of like an aircraft vessel, and each and every one of those content scripts is like an F-14 or F-18, depending on the aircraft vessel, that can inject code to any website. And the way they conduct their payload is really dependent on whether they do it elegantly from that hidden memory space or did they do it on the content script? Think about it from an attacker standpoint. If, let's say, I want to steal data, I want to steal identities, but let's say I'm not hacking enterprises, today I'm only hacking consumers. I want your Instagram cookies because I want to take over your Instagram account and publish my own cosmetic line or something, then I only need to detonate my payload on Instagram. In that standpoint, I have two choices to make. One of them, do I want how do I get extension on the Chrome store? Do I want to buy one? Do I want to compromise one? Do I want to develop one and gain popularity? The second one is, where do I hide the malicious code? If I put it on the background service, it will run always. It will be very, very, very resilient, but someone will be able to test this. There is a guy in Google, I think more than one guy, hopefully. It's a big organization, they can afford it, checking the code of all those extensions. Maybe someone will scan the code and detect it. But if I do it on the content script is dependent on the website. It will only detonate once I hit Instagram. So then that guy who's testing the extension will have to check it on each and every site. And there is a high likelihood that they will just miss that from happening. So as an attacker, I have a lot of freedom. I'd say that the main challenge I will have is, how do I get to have a valuable extension that users have? The infection, not the payload itself. I have some background about extensions, but since we don't have that much time, just for you to read the main differences, the background script, the service worker, is a central brain of the extension, operates independently of tabs. So once the browser is on, about half a second later, it's also on. It has full access to Chrome API, so it's running at the most elevated level inside the browser, but has no direct DOM access. It can touch the different sites, whereas the content script run within the websites, can manipulate code. It is very flexible in execution times. It can detonate based on some sort of a trigger. It can listen to user activities. One of the things that the content script can do is place a listener on a password field. It doesn't, steal the password from the browser. It will place a listener waiting for the user to give away the password, then encode it, send it to a CNC, and it can communicate with the background script. Naturally, the background piece is the most important stuff. So, why are malicious extensions such an effective attack vector? Ambiguous. Most users have browser extensions installed already, so it's there. Mostly harmless. The vast majority of extensions are legitimate and offer meaningful productivity benefits. Eventually, when you go down that rabbit hole of checking which extensions are deployed in your environment, you'll find that most of it is in the gray zone. Like, it's not shouting to the world, I am malware, but it doesn't also shout to the world, I am saving your business. It will be things such as golf coupon codes that the user wants to have once they browse the web. It can be even something synced from another device. I will admit, inside a company that does browser security, we had legitimate malicious infections that were not for the purpose of demoing, just users doing their user stuff and inviting all kinds of extensions in different ways, either by syncing from another device or just falling victim to some sort of a social engineering. Eventually, it happens very often. Lastly, invisible to existing solutions. There is some sort of a perception that if it's on the device, something that I have on my device will catch it. And if that doesn't apply, I have something on the network that will catch it otherwise. So that's the traditional perimeter security approach. The thing is this, from the underlying device standpoint, whatever happens inside the browser is the browser itself. The way for you to check that once you open your laptop, check the task manager of Chrome versus the task manager of your Windows. On Windows, you'll have about 90 tabs of Chrome, working in security probably even more than that. But inside the task manager of the browser, you'll see all those different processes. So from the operating system standpoint, they can't tell, is this a website reaching out for a cookie? Is it a browser service? Or is it an extension? It's really, really hard to catch that. And naturally, over time, there has been a trend in which EDR vendors walked away from injecting code into browsers because of performance issues. This is a known phenomenon in the last couple of years. On a network level, just the extension doesn't really create meaningful network traffic. It's really, really silent. It's working from the edge. It's launching whenever the browser is launching itself. So we understand that an extension can be malicious, but then the question is, how do I get it to the browser, which is actually the biggest piece? How do I get an extension to get to the other side? By the way, Google has become really, really good with blocking all kinds of infection vectors. The thing is that users find creative ways to do things, and by the way, in a way, what you see in advertisements and ad tech is really applicable to malvertising or malicious activities. So how can a browser extension become compromised? First of all, it can be born malicious, that someone just uploaded to the Chrome store, An example is an extension called ChatGPT for Google. By the way, I have like 1 million AI fake extensions that are actually malware in disguise. It can be a compromised legitimate extension, which is probably one of the most virtuous ways to have a malicious infection. The best case for that is Cyberhaven from last Christmas. And it can also have an ownership transfer. We once had made an experiment. We opened up a Proton mail and sent to, I think, a couple dozen extension owners, each having over 100,000 installations, the following message. I'm representing a media agency who wants to remain anonymous. We would like to negotiate on buying your extension, which really shouts to the world something fishy. And actually many, not all, but many developers were willing to negotiate and get into some sort of a conversation. Everything has a price. By the way, when an extension is installed on a browser, it will fetch the identity, the domain, from the browser. So for devices that are enrolled to a domain, the extension owner will know which enterprises have that extension. It's not pray and spray. You actually know which enterprises are infected with this extension, so you can actually understand what's the net value of that extension from an attacker standpoint. Lastly, side-loaded by malware. That would be something that a file will deploy. So again, 20 years ago, there were exploit kits that attackers would sell, and their core purpose would be to deploy a malware on the device. Today, we see something entirely reverse. Devices get malware, and then the malware is pushing an extension to the browser. And the reason for this is this. An attacker would really, really prefer to have your email over having your hard disk. Your hard disk is not that valuable relatively to your identity, especially in enterprises. So you'd find malware pushing extensions on the device in side loading, which is one of those techniques. Until a couple of weeks ago, there was another mechanism that just got deprecated, which is pushing developer mode extensions. But Google had blocked that and removed that. So Google is proactive to some degree in this space. We have all kinds of examples for attacks leveraging that, but eventually it's there, it's happening more often than people know it. Just to share about the Cyberhaven campaign, within our client base, 90% of our clients had an extension that had a takeover. So 9 every 10 organizations had at least one infection. So it's pretty common. Eventually they know how to target those high utilization extensions that are everywhere. So we covered so far, how do they get there? Why can they be malicious? Let's talk a little bit about the exploitation, the payload, once they're inside the browser. So extensions are really defined by the kind of data they have access to. That data is defined by the kind of permissions they have. So they can have permissions into all kinds of things inside the browser. Cookies would be one example of those. The browser identity data, the domain in which it's enrolled. Password stores. The ability to place a listener on a password field. So think about your password manager. It's always there suggesting to fill in your password on all kinds of sites. By the way, all of them are using the same open source to detect that. An attacker can use the same open source to just detect the password field and listen. Client certificates, SAML certificates as well, text input, all clipboard actions as well. Browsing metadata and page content. So pretty much anything that happens inside the session, whether the user is triggering that or the website. This is a sample of the different kind of permissions that are really, really valuable for credentials and identities. So cookies is probably the best one, probably the holy grail, that can read, modify, or delete cookies. How do you know if there is a chance that you have a cookie stealer on one of your devices, a user that fell victim more than once to an account takeover that is not explained by anything else would be a good indication for that. A cookie permission is really game over in terms of identity security. Is this permission about to die or change? No. There are good usages for the cookie permission inside the browser. All the different browser vendors have added encryption mechanisms to cookies over time. So they're isolating those cookies from the underlying device. So the jar is becoming way more powerful, but the cookies are decrypted inside the browser. So for an extension reviewing those cookies, they always see them decrypted. The encryption doesn't really matter. Next one is called the web request that observes and intercepts network requests and modify them. It's something that is becoming less common nowadays with Google trying to restrict them to fight ad blockers. This permission allows taking data from the network level. So if a website is passing some sort of an identity flag of any sort, that permission will be able to sniff or manipulate it from the background. How would I use that? Let's say that the user will sign into a website, disrupting the request, mirroring all the traffic to another browser owned by me as an attacker, and then just printing on the page, 400 and something, bad luck, try again later. The last two are scripting and content scripts that allow just, wrapping anything within the web page and in an invisible envelope that is controlled by me, the attacker. So let's say that I am able to detect different kind of fields inside a website. It can be a password field, but it can also be a chatbot on an AI application or whatever. I now know that this is a field that is really, really interesting. I can wrap that with something using a script that I can inject everywhere. There is no hiding from that. And then whenever a user will submit the data, before the data goes on the network level, I will be able to hijack that. Historically, attacks such as many in the browser were doing that with vulnerabilities. Today, it's possible to do it with extensions, just taking over the data. So the user will believe they've submitted a password, but actually it will go to me, the attacker, and actually the website will never actually get the password. In terms of TTPs, the first one, stealing web session cookies, pretty simple, working out of bound. So as an attacker, I just need to get the extension. As long as the browser is on, I can create this myself. Now, there are all kinds of ways to be very creative because an extension can do all kinds of things. For example, the extension can even open up a tab, minimize it on the point on the corner of the screen and steal data. But in this case, it will just, dump all the cookies from the memory of the browser. It's actually an API going to the browser. Game over. All the identities are now belonging to me. The second one, which I think is more common because it's more common in terms of permissions, is the ability to sniff password usage. Then I have to wait for a user to have that. Pause for a second. This has a lot of meanings for us defenders when we try to remediate those risks. Cookie permission, game over. But sniffing permissions, I need to wait for users to sign into an application. If you are blessed with users that never sign out or sign in, or you don't ask them to change their passwords, that can take a lot of time. So the time to detect that you have an infection is becoming very significant. In this case, an attacker will place the extension in a way that's sniffing the DOM mutation, the changes within the site, and will try to hijack things that are being generated on the flight, the generation of a new cookie or the content of a cookie upon its usage, or alternatively just to check for the different identity data from within the browser. So a user submitting a password, or the SAML provider is creating some sort of a token, and pretty much anything else that can be used for identity usage. If you're interested, we've done some sort of a mapping for all the different kind of TTPs related to browser extensions and how they could be used on MITRE. And again, you can also search for that on Google and get to that. I would say that by the time this is open, those permissions don't really change that much. Actually, it's a very safe environment for developers because the APIs are very, very persistent. The notifications about those changes are happening very, very slowly. But there is one meta question. Is the ecosystem of permissions for browser extensions going down over time or increasing? What actually we experience that over time, the permissions in the browser are actually increasing in quality from an attacker standpoint. Now, I will let you guess what is the latest permission that was generated for browser extensions off the top of your head? Prompt API. Now extensions can actually utilize AI in the browser and send prompts to the browser to do all kinds of things. So again, from an attacker standpoint, I now can generate a prompt. I don't have to be a real developer. And now if that AI is becoming plugged into the password vault, I can use a prompt injection to fetch the password. So all kinds of things that allow me a lot of creativity when I try to get data. And it also, actually what really changes is the kind of data I can steal, by the way, from just passwords and cookies to now passwords, cookies, prompts, data in motion, OAuth scopes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just expanding and growing because this is where users spend most of their time. We don't see any indication to changes in the ecosystem in the near future, except for the emergence of APIs to AI in the browser that are becoming very, very common. Just last week, to share, we have released a responsible disclosure for vulnerability in the AI mechanism of Perplexity's browser. From under the hood, I can share that the different browser vendors have those discussions when they increase the permissions and what they can utilize, that they also use them to be more competitive. They know that they increase the risk. So there is some sort of a harmonica kind of momentum, whether they let more data going out and then they accept the fact that risk is increasing or not. And we know that AI is really changing a lot in that space, especially now with anticipating OpenAI to release a browser soon. A couple of examples, to share. It can be anything from a campaign that we found for malicious extensions that are used just to replace your advertisements with new advertisements to steal data and just monetize on traffic itself, or it can be something that is supposed to steal, AI-related data with fake ChatGPT extensions that are becoming very popular. By the way, the hardest part with writing a malicious extension is making the victim work hard enough to install it. That's probably the hardest piece. And not all the demographics in the organization are as accessible to the attacker. Developers have always been more accessible. Now with AI, it opens up a lot of venues. But when you think about some sort of, what can you do to simulate this, anything that can be compelling to someone is relevant. So I'm getting to the last chunk of the session, which is defense, and then opening up for questions. How to secure passwords against compromised browser extensions and malicious extensions in the browser. So we have a couple of potential strategies. The first one is to use an allow list. And an allow list means that you're running a list of IDs that you allow. You manually or automatically review it and allow it. It has to be deployed using GPO, MDM, SSEM, or an enterprise browser. Enterprise browsers, by the way, are not only the paid ones that you see outside, but also the enterprise version of Chrome, Edge, and soon to be Firefox. So the main browser vendors are trying to create enterprise flavors, and enterprise browser means cloud management to a browser. They can still be hit, because if I take over a legit extension, it will still be there, as we've seen with the CyberHaven example. By the way, there was another security vendor on that attack. It's just less known. Second approach, a block list. Scan periodically and add IDs to the block list. Requires a robust scanning routine for all approved browsers. And that's a great way to waste time and still be compromised, because eventually you just need to add known malicious items once in a while. You do waste the time, but it wouldn't really keep you secure for the next one, assuming that Google does take care of those hit extensions. By the way, when Google finds a malicious extension on the Chrome store, it doesn't remove it from users that have them. It just removes it from the store. So if you're already infected, it's still there. You have to wait for users to remove it manually, but it's still, valuable. The third one is no extensions at all. Some organizations do that, not many. I would put my money that Bank of America doesn't allow users to have extensions, but most organizations I came across so far do allow them. Or you need to do some sort of a risk-based security approach into how to, evaluate them. So it all starts with getting some sort of visibility. The average number of browsers in an enterprise is growing. I didn't touch here something else, which is extensions to other frameworks. So IDEs, VS Code, Cursor, and others are actually working in a very similar mechanism to a browser. They are built on the same V8 engine, which is the rendering engine that creates visuals, but they're built with a different kind of wrapper. So you have extensions to VS Code and Cursor and other applications as well. So we'll see this happening everywhere, but you still have to start with catch them all, understanding which browsers you have and mapping the different extensions. The ID is not enough because the ID can change over time. So it's the ID and a specific version security risk assessment. So that goes to the classification. Every extension can have a new version every day, every week. Assuming that a version of an extension will be the same extension everywhere, it means that for every extension, the number of versions it has historically is the number of appearances and mutations it has. So you need to have a list of all of them and across the different extensions. And then enforcement has to be risk adaptive and needs to be responsive to what you care about. What do I mean by that? Organizations that use device certificate or a physical IP range are less vulnerable to account takeovers. Significantly. Organizations that don't have regulation for data security can really care less about extensions that can steal data. So it's not the same for every organization, and that's something which is very visible out there, whether it's a network compromise, identity compromise, or data compromise, will affect the different kind of extensions, permissions, and risk postures. Now, here comes the different challenges for that in terms of pitfalls. So the discovery piece, you have all the browsers covered, and now we have new browsers such as, we already see about like 6 or 7 AI browsers, but we see more and more popping up every day, and it's starting to become more challenging. I think one of the most interesting cases is Atlassian acquiring recently a browser company with 2 browsers and trying to take those browsers to the market as a service to use Atlassian in a more secure way. You have secure browsers as Island and Palo Alto, and you also see vertical productivity browsers. I will not be surprised if Epic will release their own browser soon as well. So that's becoming a gap. Understanding that is critical because eventually attackers will go to those browsers in which most activity is happening. Second one is risk classification, is what's standing behind the ID, understanding the polymorphism. We've talked about that. There are all kinds of gaps to that, but I'd say the biggest one is the fact that an extension background worker, the monolithic part that everyone sees, is not always indicative from an attacker standpoint. So the best way to do that would be to sandbox an extension nonstop, and ideally even having some sort of a runtime security assessment. By the way, it is possible, but it's really, really hard because it's responding differently to each and every site. Lastly, on the enforcement side, a lot of organizations have challenges when using device management tools, responding in time because they have to get this into some sort of a device management routine. When you combine it with a different extension ID, let's say that you run some sort of a task every week, but an extension can update every day, it creates some sort of a blind spot window in between that is affecting the effectiveness of this solution because you have some sort of a time to detect the risk adaptive rules in different kinds of conditions. I'd say that the holy grail will probably be to have runtime security nonstop, which is, again, not that easy to get on all the different browsers. For that, just to share, we have one resource that we've created, Larex. It's called Extensionpedia. Extensionpedia is an online resource for extensions, extension security. We have a technology alliance with Google, so every extension on the Chrome store is either already scanned by us, sandboxed, or to be scanned in the future. There is a chance we'll do the same with Firefox and Edge in the future, assuming that there are some extensions for Edge only. And that provides assessment on risk, permissions, and reputation, which is valuable, and it's free to use online. Every organization that uses Chrome Enterprise actually gets this inside their Google console. Our goal is to provide all the basics and have the largest library in the market for extensions, whether they're on or off the marketplace. To wrap up, and I know that we're a bit ahead of time, but it's not necessarily bad. Extensions are everywhere. The threat surface is everyone. Browser extensions have extensive access permissions that can be abused for credential and password compromise. So, organizations spend so much money on securing the network, and then there is something that just sees all the traffic decrypted. You just go figure yourself what can happen, but if you've invested historically in a physical firewall and allowing this, it's an unbalanced risk appetite. Human identity security equals browser security. All the applications I have on my device store their passwords and credentials inside my browser, period. So my Slack, my Zoom, my ID all go to the browser to store the cookies and passwords. Various tools can help, but make sure to balance cost versus manual work. Eventually, the big gap is doing this enumeration on the different browsers, different versions, different users, different communities, when again, the most challenging ones have been historically developers, but not only. I'm a bit ahead of time. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it was not too exhausting, and I'll be happy to take questions now. Yes. So we did the different browsers. In terms of code level security, Chrome is the most secure. Chrome is feeding the ecosystem with the Chromium project. So since Chrome is considered a monopoly to satisfy the regulators and antitrust, Google is giving away its code base to everyone else. However, all the other companies are using Chromium to add code on top of that. And that means two things. First of all, Google only lets others know on a security gap or vulnerability once they've patched it themselves. So always Chrome will be more patched. The other thing is that all other companies are adding code on top of Chromium. I come from a thesis that says that code equals bugs and vulnerabilities. Some other people think that code equals other things. So I think that Google is the one which is closest to the open source and has the best security patching routine. That is, by the way, and then that's my personal theory, only one vulnerability has been discovered in the last 3 years by a security vendor in the different browsers. All the rest were mitigated by Google itself, and that's very, very abnormal. The number of actual security holes on the low level is relatively low. As for extension management, I'd say that at the moment there is no big gap. When browsers that have their own stores are more vulnerable, that will be, anything from an Avast or Opera that eventually you don't have any assurance. I know that within the cybersecurity ecosystem now, the browser security ecosystem, there is now a discussion around the implementation of AI that will probably move the needle in the space in the next couple of years. Stupid browsers will be more secure, but users will want to have smart browsers. So companies that will manage to balance between them will probably provide the best balance for enterprises. I would say that you see a real gap in between of how they address that. So for example, Chrome has an AI engine now. I know it's off topic, so hope that's not disturbing anyone. Chrome has an AI engine in the browser, and it's letting it a little bit of permissions. So you can use it. It's temporary. It's disposable. It doesn't remember anything. So even if I take over that AI, it has amnesia. It doesn't really learn anything, but it's really limited in what it provides. Microsoft has Copilot everywhere, but they changed it in all kinds of restrictions, so it's not that usable. On the other side, we have Comet of Perplexity and other AI vendors that they just push AI everywhere. It's taking screenshots off your browser on the flight, creating some sort of a workflow. They really, really learn the user, when the promise is that eventually, over time, you'll actually be able to tell them, hey, I would like you to take this call from Gong and upload the summary to Salesforce. It's almost Friday, and my VP is waiting for me to do that. Or if I'm a developer, go search the web for something and add it there. The agentic mode that only the pure AI vendors are providing is creating a lot of different kind of risks, especially with regard to extensions, because then if I have an engine that can browse the web and do all kinds of things, if I'm able to take over that, that's significant. So to wrap up my answer, within the existing ecosystem, Chrome is probably the most secure browser by far and provides the best enterprise controls, followed by Edge and Firefox. In the future, we'll see a huge conflict between browsers that allow AI in a non-secure manner to browsers that avoid AI and are left out of the game. My personal theory, we'll probably see OpenAI hitting the market and defining some sort of a standard. It will be like an iPhone moment in this space, and we'll see new kinds of attacks popping up everywhere. By the way, you already see them, because attackers are hiding now prompts inside of Reddit, because they know that the AI vendors are scanning Reddit really often. So they already do that. It's not imaginary or theoretical, so they'll just start, instead of sending phishing pages, they'll send phishing pages targeting your browser. So it won't be social engineering, it will be mechanical engineering or robot engineering, something that's supposed to compromise the AI which is baked in. Probably that will be the battlefield in the next couple of years. The least secure ones are those that are free in providing you consumer benefit, like Opera, or all those that say that are private and you shouldn't be using Google. And if you don't pay to be licensing them, but they still pay to advertise to you, it brings up the question of why are they doing that? And probably they have some sort of a hidden incentive, so I wouldn't be using them. So you are pointing what I should have said and I didn't. So thank you. It's a shared responsibility model. It's usage versus security by design. So the security by design on Chrome is great. And then it goes to, is my car secure? Is a Honda secure enough? Is it good enough for a drunk driver? It's the same logic here. So the extension in the browser can behave like a user. It can do anything a user can do in a bit more. So it goes to what, it's kind of like I don't know if it's chicken and egg problem, but the browser vendors themselves use these permissions, and there is an ecosystem of vendors, us included, by the way. Us included, we also use these permissions to provide security capabilities. But you know what? They don't care about us. They care about 1Password and LastPass and Grammarly. They really care about them. There are communities, and you have, kind of like, Deep State, in which all those main extension developers and the browser vendors, they communicate about the path forward of this ecosystem. And then you have conflicting interests when, the browser vendors and Grammarly and 1Password and others, they want more power, us included. But, hackers also want these permissions. And then there is a huge problem with how to address this, which goes to pretty much anything else in security. An admin account, you need admins. They have a lot of power. Service accounts, you need those. They have a lot of power. So this is not that different. It's just a very creative way in, especially to identities and data. You can block this. You can also try to remove the risks. So I met, CISOs that are unfishable. They don't have SaaS or whatever. There are all kinds of ways to address that, or some that make data unusable by design. It's just a usage gap that is unsolvable. Even when you think about encryption, post-quantum, you have companies now already investing in better network architecture and cloud providers. Extension developers don't care about that. It's just there. It's listening to all the things. I'm always, myself included, signing I'm post-quantum proof because we don't care about encryption, which is a big gap. It's a big hurdle. So there is no answer to that. So our method to analyzing them is combined by a couple of things. It's the reasonable usage, like should an extension have these permissions, considering their reputation, and looking at them as some sort of a supply chain. So I'm claiming to be something that's ChatGPT, but asking for the access to your cookies, and my email address was never seen before, so I'm not a legit business. That's one thing. Second thing is static code analysis. So eventually attackers also reuse code. So all the methods that were very popular in malware analysis are very applicable in extension analysis as well. You look for code patterns, sloppy development, and runtime security. And then there is the sandboxing piece. The sandboxing is very valuable. Then again, I would admit that I think with the sandboxing, it has a limitation that if an attacker is looking for a very specific website to compromise, that will become very challenging to detect. So everyone is checking Facebook, and everyone is checking Gmail and Outlook and everything. If someone really, really made something really, really tailored to a specific user in a specific scenario, that would be, again, virtuous, but that can be very valuable. Lastly is runtime security. I really believe in runtime security. Eventually, the way malicious extensions work, they need to inject code to the website. They behave as guests inside this website. So, they break in, but they still don't want to make noise. So typically, they will place listeners. Those listeners have, they leave breadcrumbs that you can detect in real time. So probably the most effective mechanism is to do that and using real usage of users as a mechanism to detect those IOCs at runtime. Those are the best mechanisms possible. Then there are offline IOCs, an extension that change ownership, permissions, code at one point in time. That can be very indicative to something. So there are a lot of things you can see that really indicate you should be looking at this one. It's not very common. Then there is the infection vector, which can be a browser sync. It can be some sort of a third-party application. And just, to summarize that, one of the best cases we've seen on Reddit is security operator saying how they caught a keylogger in their environment. So they had a case of an employee whose husband suspected her of having an affair. So he put a keylogger on her browser at home. But due to browser syncing, that synced the keylogger into the work device and started fetching passwords and taking screenshots of work applications. And they found that to be, the path of infection. And again, they didn't see it because no tool actually discovered that for them. And then they realized that, I don't know if it was an X or not, but he got all those passwords and screenshots. It's becoming very, very easy. And again, it happens everywhere. Even us had a former employee who synced his home browser into the work device, and that invited a malicious extension into the device. Yeah?
Do you have an opinion on Safari?
If I have an opinion about Safari. First of all, Apple is, assuming that everyone here is in IT and security, they're trying to make Safari way more manageable. So they're trying to hug IT and security, so we want to hug them back. They are doing a lot of effort to make Macs and Safari more manageable, and they have allowed extensions on iOS, so they've done all kinds of things. It's harder to get across the Apple verification process, but it is possible. And my very not politically correct answer is because it's not a lot of juice for a squeeze. A lot of developers avoid attacking Safari because there are not that many users over there. But it's not different. So there are about 3 kinds of permissions that Safari doesn't provide, but cookies and scripting are not those. So if you are stealing identities, Safari is as vulnerable. It's less vulnerable to deploying malware. So it depends on your risk appetite. Any other question? All right. I hope it was interesting enough that you're not too scared. And still, it's more good than harm. So thank you very much for attending.